If you're an underquoter, you're going to get into a lot of trouble.
Here's what I've learned. The best of the best have got the following.
What's your goal for the next 6 months?
Today we're speaking with the President of the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales, John Cunningham, about the new auction laws. Let's go and have a chat. Hey everyone, Tom Panos, super excited. It's 2016 and it's going to be a great year. It's also a year that the laws in New South Wales for auctions have changed, and we're so fortunate to have one of the best in the business. He's also the President of the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales, John Cunningham, here today. Hey Johnny.
Hey Tommy, thanks.
How you
mate.
going?
Very, very well.
Hey, how lucky are we? We've got the person that was involved in supporting the real estate industry when they were in consultation with the government. We've got someone that's, how long have you been auctioning real estate?
Oh gosh, 30 years.
30 years,
Yeah.
Okay. All the New South Wales agents, we're fortunate right now because what I want to do is, the laws have changed. So when did the laws change?
1st of January, it's happened.
Okay, so it's happened. So what you're saying is right now in this current environment, you have to be working within these new laws.
Absolutely 100%.
Okay, firstly, I want to know, has a lot changed, John?
Look, fundamentally no. The previous laws were a little bit wishy-washy, as probably everyone's aware. Wasn't specific enough, and as agents we like to live in the black and white world, and I think there was too much grey area. I think these new laws have certainly extended that. You know, is it what we wanted? Is it what we need as an industry? Probably not, but it's what we've got. And I think from that perspective we've got to now work with those changes effectively.
Okay, can I ask you, what is the most significant part of the new laws? I'd like to drill down and firstly work out what it is and what it's not, because there's a lot of real estate agents that don't know what the change is.
Look, I found that out through the roadshows we're doing at the Institute through December. A lot of confusion, and I think you can succinctly sum it up in a few little areas. First of all, keeping of records. That's the number one thing in my view. Agents are now, under the Act, required to keep a record of every conversation they have with a prospective buyer where they have mentioned a price quotation, whether that be at an open home, whether that be on the phone in the car, whether it be by email, whatever it may be. Now, the challenge for agencies is to say, okay, how am I going to do that? And I think there are certainly ways of achieving that in an effective manner. Second one is the price range.
John, and we're going to drill into how to apply it into your business.
Absolutely.
That sounds, to me, listening to that, that sounds like in a typical campaign, you could have, you know, hundreds of conversations with people. Do you think we can work within those laws?
I think we can certainly work within those laws, and I think we can actually turn it into a positive. So many principals I talk to, one of their biggest issues is agents keeping good records,
Right.
keeping good file notes, keeping their CRMs up to date. This is an opportunity to actually have that happen. It's funny that we had to be legislated to do that, but imagine that opportunity, all that field of diamonds out there that people just let disappear on a phone call in the car or a phone call they're not recording.
Yeah.
Well, now they're actually obliged to record that information. So
Okay.
it's like opportunities falling down cracks. Every opportunity is there for you.
Okay, so keeping records, next change in the laws?
Next change, the 10% rule. So
what's the 10% rule?
10% rule is that when you provide a price estimate to a seller in your MA or in your agency agreement, it can be no more than 10% above the lowest level of your estimate of selling price. You're not obliged to use the 10% range, but it is an option. You can do a fixed number, you can do 5%, you can do whatever you want, but it can't be more than 10%.
So if you've got, you can put on an agency agreement, for instance, 1 million to 1.1.
Correct.
And what are you saying? It's got to be a 10% from the lowest number.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So if you do say a 1.5, you can do 1.65. You can't do a 1.66.
Right.
You know, that's a good example. So people have to understand their maths. It's 10% above the lowest.
And is that the figure you quote, or is that the estimated selling price? What's that?
That's classed as the estimated selling price. And
Right.
under the legislation, when you quote a price to a prospective buyer, you cannot quote less than the lowest estimate of your selling price. That's a really important thing. Having said that, there's also a provision in the Act that says you can no longer use terms such as offers over or offers from or plus symbols or anything of that nature. So there's a terminology shift as well. But fortunately they've told us what we can't do, and they're now telling us what we can do in the new guidelines.
Okay, so Cunningham's is a great agency in the northern beaches of Sydney, and one of the things that what you're saying is that when you'll be speaking to buyers is you'll be using a range?
Yep, we'll be using a range. We've made a decision in our business that when we quote price, say an advertisement or on the web, we will just have guide, and it'll be that number.
Right.
Let's say the million number, the lowest estimate of our selling price, or anywhere in between that 10%. But we'll be just using a single number.
So John, so I'm clear. If you've got on your agent estimate selling price 1 million to 1.1, can you quote any figure between that number to a buyer?
Correct.
So you could say 1,010,000.
Correct.
Right. So you can quote either the range that is on the agency agreement, or you can quote any number within that range.
Correct.
Okay. What is needed for you to arrive at accurately giving an estimated selling price?
Great question, Tom, because that's one of the key shifts as well. Now, under the previous legislation, you actually were obliged to provide that evidence. I think this legislation has tidied up a little bit more in terms of what you need. There are checklists that OFT provide and the Institute provide that you can just follow. It's quite simple. What are all the areas of concern that you put into play to determine that? So what comparable sales, market conditions, zoning, economic conditions around you, whatever it may be that you, as a professional agent, have deemed necessary to arrive at that number. Now, I know we're not valuers, I'm a valuer, but most agents aren't valuers, they're not trained in valuation. But the Minister has determined that he considers that we are professional. He wants us to become a profession, and this is probably the first start in that process of saying, okay, if we're going to be seen as professional and trusted advisors, are we putting in the necessary legwork up front to determine those things? Are we putting in what's required to back our estimate? In other words, we own that estimate. That's our estimate. Your estimate might be different to mine, Tom, but I'm the listing agent and I own that estimate and I follow that through. If I need to change it, I can do that as well. And this new legislation has made that much tidier as well in terms of how we need to change it.
Okay, so typically you'd have a file, and in that file you'll have things that support what you've come up with, that agent estimate selling figure.
Yep.
Some of the things that you'd have would be what? RP data comparables?
Yes, so there's no limit to the number of comparables that you do, but it's a standard practice. You would have at least 2 below, 2 in the middle, 2 above in terms of where you think it might be. You could have an example of a home that you consider to be worth $2 million, but right next door there's been a sale of $1 million. Now the reason that was a $1 million sale is it was land value only, and you're sitting on your listing with $1 million worth of land and $1 million worth of improvements. Now that's a comparable sale in anyone's guess. It helps people determine where things are. So that would sort of show that the evidence that you use to determine that is not necessarily restricted to that 10%. You know, that's the reality of the situation. But the estimate that you provide the seller must be the same as the estimate you provide the prospective buyers.
Okay, so that's very clear, John. What you're saying is whatever number you got on the agency agreement, you will quote to the buyers, and gone are, you no longer can say things like 1 million plus,
correct,
bidding from $1 million, offers over $1 million. Are they clear about that?
They are clear about that, and it's important that particular terminology. So terminology that's come out of the guidelines is you can do bidding guide, you can do auction guide, price guide, price estimate as an example. They're just examples of the type of things that you can actually use. So I used to use bidding guide for years. I thought it was a great terminology to use. And in our business, we've made a decision to use just guide and auction guide. So they'll be the 2 words that we will use to determine. And for our private treaty sales at a fixed price, we're just having for sale and the number. So I just wanted to simplify it as much as possible.
So what's the difference between guide and auction guide? You said
it's just, I think the auction identifies it as being an auction property.
Right.
And again, everyone's going to take a different view on that, but I think the important thing is that the consumer will get to understand those parameters in what they are. Some people are saying, well, I'm actually going to use estimated selling price, which is what's on my agency agreement. That's fine as well. It's just to not mislead or to bait advertise, which is the main reason this has come around, because bait advertising and all that misleading, deceptive conduct is covered out in the Australian consumer law. So this underquoting law, that's a New South Wales law, is underpinned by the Australian consumer law. And probably a lot of agents don't really know about that.
Right.
That's the bit that really you've got to watch out for, because that's the act that talks about consideration being given to what the owner hopes to achieve for a property. So you can't be misguiding people on that. And so you've got to marry the two laws together.
Okay, so I'm a little bit confused now, because if you've got, typically a situation where you've got, John, someone, let's assume you think 1 to 1.1, that's your agent estimate selling price. You get all the comparables, 2 below, 2 above, economic conditions that you talk about. You make some file notes and say, this is what's happening in the market, this is the zoning. But the owner is hoping to get 1.2. How does an agent handle that situation?
Look, it's a good question, and it's probably the area that has got the most grey around it, because you've got 2 pieces of legislation working in tandem. And I'm not going to get into the legal aspects of that, that's a minefield. But the reality is the practical application of it. We have our estimated selling price, which is covered under our underquoting laws. We've got
in New South Wales.
In New South Wales. What we've got in terms of the owner's estimate, which is a fluid thing, as you know, it changes from day to day, hour to hour. That is something that more comes down to when you're actually in negotiation phase. You know, particularly if you're misleading a prospective buyer on what the owner is hoping to achieve, or a price that they've counted at, or a price that's already been offered. That's the transparency.
So that's usually well progressed.
It's well progressed.
Right. That's well progressed. So what you're saying is that piece of legislation not necessarily is as relevant towards at the time of the listing.
I would hope not.
Right.
But I'm not going to comment on that law. Because it's an area where, at the end of the day, most action gets taken under the state laws. Any actions under the Australian Consumer Law takes in consideration the state law, and does that cover it off sufficiently. But it's just something that people need to be aware of anyway. There is this piece of legislation that I think a lot of people are not aware of. And it applies to all of Australia.
The most... what is the significance of the 10% range, and what happens if, so John, here's the deal. The deal is that sometimes you only find out information after you've got evidence, and evidence is when you take people through.
Correct. That's a really important point, because that's where you start to talk about changing your estimated selling price.
Are you allowed to?
Completely.
Right.
As the agent, professional agent, deemed to be what we are, we have the skills to identify that. So yes, we can identify where we think it is at the beginning before we've had that market feedback. And you know as well as I do that the market feedback is the most critical component.
Correct.
So that market feedback can be, yep, we're spot on, we're actually a bit above where we need to be, or we're actually below where we need to be. Under the Act, if you have that information, right, and it puts the onus on you, the agent, to act professionally, to say, okay, I have enough feedback from the marketplace, I might have some offers, and I might have some sales that have occurred in the meantime that have changed my thinking, whether it be a below or above. You are deemed under the Act necessary to change that estimated selling price.
Okay. So, well, that's a good thing, because I think that's giving you flexibility to work with a fluid market.
Correct, absolutely. And I think, to my mind, I think that's one of the best parts of the new legislation.
Okay, what evidence do you need to support, John, when you do vary your estimate? It's
pretty much the same as what it started with, you know, in terms of, what is it that drives you that decision? Now, the important thing, particularly because this is underquoting law, if you change that, lower that estimate, you really want to make sure you've got good records, you've got good evidence. There will be a prescribed form with Forms Live, the Institute form, that all you would do is fill that out and send it to the owner with the evidence attached to it. That gets attached into the filing system, the electronic filing system, and so your records are kept. And this is another important thing. This enables everyone to keep really good records of what's required. Now, the owner has nothing to do with your price estimate, right? You have to make that determination based on the information you have in front of you. You notify the owner that that's happened, and that's your new price estimate. So the difference where it comes into play with the owner actually saying, okay, how do I get involved? And this is my property, obviously. The owner must approve any published price. So if you are going to quote price, and bear in mind, you don't have to quote price.
Okay, so that's the other thing. You can actually say, we don't quote a figure on this property.
So it's auction, that's it. So if you make that decision to not quote, that is your prerogative. You can change that during the campaign.
It's not very consumer friendly, is it?
Look, Tom, I don't know. I take a view that it's a bit of a balance. On a lot of properties, the 10% range, for example, you take that to Double Bay, you can't apply it. You know? You have to apply it, but in reality, you can't apply it. I'm a valuer. I can't tell the difference between a 15, 20 or $25 million home.
Well, that's a good point. If you're talking 4 million, you can't say 4 to 4.5 would be breaking the law.
Yeah, and I would imagine most 4 million plus sales that we've done, mostly quoted 4 to 5.
Yeah.
Because if that's where we think it sits, it fits somewhere in there. Now we can't do that. We have to take a call on where that 10% falls, and then make the call as we're going along. Now I think in a lot of those cases, there's no price quote. It's simply a matter of saying we're going to auction, we're doing a traditional method of auction sale, and then we'll guide you along the way from there.
John, for that property, the one that you've put on the agency agreement, 4 million to 4.4, which is within the 10% range.
Yep.
You're saying the law says you can actually quote 4 million.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I've got to tell you, when we started this conversation, I did get a little bit nervous because I just worry about the application. How do you keep records of every price representation or discussion that you have? I mean, have you thought that through?
Absolutely.
Right.
I thought everything through, mate, I can tell you. The open homes, and it's in the guidelines, we fought for this one really strongly, that whether you're doing an iPad or whether you're doing Home Pass or whether you're doing a handwritten thing, you will have a record of that representation that day. So at the top of your records, price representation today is 1 to 1.1. Yeah. That applies to everyone in that open home list. Where it gets problematic is the phone calls, the ones in the car. The emails are simple, there's a record in terms of replying that. But it's a discipline thing. And when you're sitting down at the office and you're taking calls and you've got your CRM open, you're just going to enter it in there. Yeah. It's not going to be hard. Yeah. When you're in a car, right, you finish that call, you do a voice memo to yourself. Yeah. Spoke to Joe Bloggs, told him 1.1 at 6:45 p.m. on Tuesday. Yeah. And then you transpose that into your CRM. That's what I mean about the silver lining, where you can actually get great records kept and not lose track of people.
Well, John, I think the reality is if you're working through a set process of these new guidelines, and you pretty much know that your standard operation method is that you're going to be quoting that range, it won't be hard to just transfer that information every time, because you're not coming up with 700 different combinations of numbers. It's pretty much the same thing all the time.
Yeah, exactly, Tom. And I think that's the plus of it all. I know a lot of very, very good agents who've already put in play their policies and procedures on this. It's locked in stone and done. The team's trained on it. I did a training session with my team in early December to go through how are we actually going to do this and how is it going to apply. Change our policies and procedures. And that's another important thing to do. There's a big question mark on what constitutes an offer. Right. It'll change from agent to agent. It'll change from consumer to consumer. So in our policies and procedures manual, we have what we believe is a genuine offer. In what form does that take? Because that's a consideration in the evidence that you will require to back up any issues that you may have. So for example, I submitted an offer on a property and the agent rejected it, and they didn't change their price guide. So what was the offer? It was a verbal offer, or it was a text offer, not backed up by a contract, not backed up by terms and conditions or anything of that nature. Someone could make an offer with a 10-year settlement, It's not an offer. So document and again, because you'll keep good records, because you'll have policies and procedures you'll follow, because you are a professional agent, it'll change. I think it's potentially going to be one of those dragging, kicking and screaming moments for the industry to say, okay, now we just have to up the ante and become more professional in everything we do. And look, there's a lot of agents that we know that are at that level already. They're really at that level. They've got everything nailed to that nature, and they've probably got all this nailed already. But I think it's important now for the industry to come along that journey.
And we're going to move on to that quickly. One question, and you tell me if this is allowed within the laws. So you look at a property and you believe that it's worth 1 to 1.1, but like all owners, and all owners think their home's a little bit better, they're hoping a little bit better, and they sit there and they say, listen, we're hoping, to get maybe 1.2. And you sit there as an agent and provide them the evidence in a clear approach and say, well, this is where it's at, but I'm going to try as much as I can for you. You put on the agency agreement 1 to 1.1. You can quote 1 to 1.1. Is that
Correct.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's having this skillful ability to let the owners know your job is to sell their home for the best price, and that you're going to go through a process to do that, but at the same time provide them enough evidence to let them know that even though they're hoping to get that, it seems to fall in this range.
Yep.
And good real estate agents don't seem to get caught up on that price discussion because they know that there's not enough evidence in those. There is evidence there, but not the evidence that you get after 60 or 70 buyers
Correct.
that look at a property,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And really good real estate agents have the ability to tell them that, you got 95% of the picture here or 80% of the picture here, but the reality is that we're going to get a super clear picture on your house by the day of auction.
Yeah, and I think most of that's in the pre-frame, obviously, in terms of how you're communicating with your seller. And how you're pitching the price to them and say, look, I've got to provide you, and this is another important thing, and an important pre-frame for the seller is this is called a reasonable estimate of selling price.
Yeah.
Right? Reasonable being the important word here.
Yeah.
So the pre-frame from the seller is pretty clear.
Yeah.
And you're providing the evidence like a valuer, and I use the analogy of if I was a bank valuer, for example, I'd be coming up and valuing your property at probably $1 million.
Yeah.
Most of the market is probably going to consider it about $1.05 million.
Yeah.
Premium end of the market, that possibility value could be around 1.1, might be above, but that's the range that we consider to be a reasonable estimate of selling price.
Yeah.
Now, as you go along a campaign and as you use your skills and enhance that value of the property, whether it be through your marketing techniques, your styling, your dialogues, your database, all those bits, you bring all the elements of your key strategies together. And that's when magic happens. And that can happen in no matter what the market conditions are. So a vendor or a seller has to understand, and it's up to the agent to go through that whole education process of how this works.
Yeah.
This is how it works. This is how we get to where we need to be. And I understand where you want to be. I must, under law, provide you with a reasonable estimate of selling price. And I think that in itself pretty much sums up what you need to do.
So, John, a lot of the industry have trained, educated, conditioned, call the word what you want, conditioned buyers, pre-framed them over the years that they may be able to buy a property for lower. Not every agent, some agents. And some of the consumers are used to that. How long do you think it's going to take for consumers in 2016 to realise these are the new laws? When they say 1 to 1.1, they mean 1 to 1.1.
I don't think it'll take long at all. I think the adaptability of the consumer to good information, and I think Office of Fair Trading will be putting out a fair bit of information. There will be an extensive advertising campaign through January. And I think it's also up to us, the industry. The Institute's going to be doing that as well, providing our members with information to provide consumers with. There will be good guidelines, guidebooks for consumers to understand that, both for sellers, buyers and agents. So an education program to say, hey, this is the new world. This is the brave new world we're entering into. And I think it is the fact that we're in the information age. We are no longer the keepers of information. We are the people who disseminate information very effectively to help people make good decisions. So we are, again, trusted advisors guiding people on a journey. To guide people on a good journey, you've got to give them good information to make good decisions. And I think that's the shift in terms of going from the agents of the past to the agents of the future. For our relevance and for our, to avoid that disruptor concept, we've got to provide better value, and we've got to provide better value through our services and our skills. And part of that is great, well-educated consumers, both sellers and buyers.
John, you said to me off camera that you felt excited about this because it meant that in some way, form or another, it was forcing the real estate industry to really look after the consumer, and looking after the consumer ultimately is what looks after your business.
Yeah, it's exactly right. There's a great quote that in terms of avoiding disruption and moving and progressing, we've got to stop looking at what's right for the business and move to looking what's right for the consumer. When you have that mindset, you look after the business. It's the classic reciprocity type arrangement. So I think that thinking has to shift. And it was interesting, you were at the summit with me where, we had 100 people from across Australia and New South Wales and a lot of very interesting thought leaders there and industry partners. But we still had some old thinking. Yeah. And you're going to get that in a room of 100 people. Yeah. But I felt that probably 80% of it was progressive thinking and 20% was old thinking. Yeah. And I believe that we're probably in our industry about 50-50 at the moment. I might be wrong. I'd hope it was the 80-20. Yeah. But I think there's still a long way for us to go to get that mindset of actually that whole nurturing, caring, helping the consumer make good decisions.
Yeah, well, I think the legislation, John, of having a transparent number across all stakeholders, an agent, a buyer and a seller, is in tune with the new connection economy. The new connection economy, I mean, there are no more blind dates in real estate. Everyone knows much about you. They probably know more about an agent than you know about them. They know more and more about values than any other time because the companies that provide data now have that data published on email alerts and on Sunday press. So we've got consumers that are so educated. So in many ways, if this is just another bridge to build trust between a buyer and a seller and a real estate agent, I think the trusted advisor term is not far off.
Exactly. I mean, you've got to look back at why this has happened. Why have we got this legislation? It's because we've let buyers down. We've been doing it for too long. There has not been a trust. Look at where we sit. We sit down there with politicians and used car salesmen. It's not a good place to be. It's not, I look at the clients that we deal with in our business and the feedback we get from the reviews and so on. It's like, well, if that's the way we're seen, we should be classed as professionals. Unfortunately, the majority of the consumers don't see us that way. It's an unfortunate situation. Yeah. I think it's changing. I think I've seen significant shifts in the last 5 years in the professionalism and standards of performance of agencies. But it's the new world, as you say. It's a different world to what it was. And it's a transparent world. So I think people have got to make a decision now whether they're running transparent businesses or they're living in the past.
Okay, John, thank you so much. You've got a big year ahead. Your first term as President of the Real Estate Institute, and also will continue running Cunningham's on the Northern Beaches, auctioning real estate. Yep. So I think that we're in good hands in New South Wales with having someone that is passionate about real estate, is passionate about auctions, and has worked very hard to get to an outcome that might not be the dream outcome, but you believe it's an outcome that we can work with well within.
Absolutely, and I think it's the start. In my term, it's going to be an interesting time. Probably the biggest reforms that we've seen in the industry for 20 years are coming in terms of the education standards and the entry level and the ongoing training. And I firmly believe in that. I think that's all essential. I think we've taken it, what we do, not serious enough. You know, I think we are blessed in this industry with what we have. We have unlimited opportunities, and I just don't think we take it seriously. I don't think we educate ourselves sufficiently. And it's people like yourself and the sheer goals of the world that are actually lifting that bar now to say, okay, let's. And it started with John McGrath and Eric and saying, okay, let's all perform at a higher level. But when you start to look at the numbers of people who actually go to the high level training, it's still pretty low across the whole industry. So if we have to bring in the certificate of registration course and raise that bar, bring up the licensing bar to a higher level, and bring up the ongoing training to a higher level, I think everyone's going to benefit from that.
Absolutely, Johnny. Good to see you. Thanks so
mate.
much.
Thank you.
Awesome.
They're the new laws for auctions in New South Wales. I'd love to work with you on the Real Estate Gym. If you go to realestategym.com.au, let me coach you in 2016.